People, thank you very much for being with us. Today, we have Robert Keyghobad. Is that the way you pronounce it?
Keyghobad.
Keyghobad, or
there you go.
The key guy that goes bad, something like that?
Something like that.
So he is the director of the Guild of America, DGA, director of Guild of Canada, DGC, and producer, Guild of America, with over 20 years of experience in the feature film and television industry. So, Robert, let's start by saying that you have a career, or you had a career in financials and investment strategy as a financial investment strategist.
Yes.
So that's quite a big change, Robert. Why don't you talk to us about that? How did you become a producer?
So I grew up in a place called Boulder, Colorado, Westminster, Colorado, to be exact, which is a suburb of our capital city, Denver. And in Colorado, we don't really have a film industry or a big commercial industry, or we have a sports documentary kind of background industry going on there, at least at the time when I grew up there. And I've always been fascinated with movies and stuff, but, not growing up in LA, not knowing anybody, not going to like University of California, Los Angeles, or University of Southern California, or NYU, any of the more established film universities, if you will, had no idea how to get in. But I always loved the ideas of going to movies. I love television shows. But like anything in life, you kind of just find your way. I graduated from college and took the first job I could get, which happened to be in finance, if you will, primarily, believe it or not, estate planning, in dealing with, unfortunately, when people pass away. So it was honestly a very hard job emotionally, seeing people lose their loved ones, but still at the same time trying to help them navigate the financial world. But at the same time, I kind of just took the job. It wasn't something I really wanted to do. And I think a lot of us fall into that, especially I'm pretty much first generation American. Yes, my mother was raised here, but her family wasn't. And definitely my father wasn't. My father immigrated from Iran back in 1962. So it was always be a doctor, be a lawyer. I'm sure you guys hear that. Or an engineer like my father. It just wasn't for me. I took more after my mother, who was very much an artist, used to do watercolors, stuff like that. And so I just found myself not knowing what to do. So I started taking some night courses at the University of Colorado Boulder. And the professor I had there had worked in Los Angeles for a number of years. And he just said, look, if you really want to do it, you have to go to the center of all the action, where all the decisions are made. And for film or television, that is Los Angeles.
Still today, right?
Today, still, most of the decision makers are all there. I mean, you do have some more higher level corporate decision stuff made back in New York City. But if you want to work creatively in film and television, LA is still the place to start your career. My professor was saying that at the time, you have to go to LA because that's the center of everything. Like I said, New York is more on a corporate level. So I eventually just saved up a little, not a whole lot. At the time, my brother was going to law school out here. So I kind of just lived between him and just lived with him actually on his couch. So I kind of figured out what I was going to do. And what I eventually did do is I did some courses at UCLA Extension, which is very much like what I was doing back in Colorado. But the advantage of doing that at UCLA is it's not UCLA proper. It's more like continuing education, stuff like that. So the classes at night are actually taught by working professionals who either want to give back. Yeah, either they want to give back to the community or they are retired and just want to help people, right?
Yes.
I did courses there, and eventually I did an internship with the former CEO of Sony at a company called Mandalay. And that's eventually how I really started getting in. And they liked me and they helped me get my first job on a television show. And that's how I kind of started.
Wow, that's quite a change. But do you trade? Do you do any financials actually these days?
I do. I do a lot of budget building, figuring out what things cost and how are we going to do it and how we're going to do it determines how much it costs and where we're going determines how much it costs. So
the industry that you like, which is film and television.
It's interesting. I'm a guy that didn't do very good in math in elementary or high school or even in college, but I'm really good when it comes to budgeting. I'm really good when it comes to numbers. But what I am really good is logistics. And so before I became more in the physical production side of stuff, so in my career I started more on the creative side, more actually finding projects, bringing them to the boss I had at the time, developing material, mostly primarily in television at that point, television series. And, it was more traditional series at that time. So the cable was still kind of out there, but satellite then started, there was definitely no streaming at the time when I started. So I started in realistically like 97, 98. So, and at that time, there was none of that. It just wasn't any of that. So did that for a number of years and eventually kind of grew out of the role. I was working with one of the directors, pilot director. And he just said, hey, you're smart, you know what's going on. Go find some material you want to produce and let's try to sell it to somebody.
Wow.
And so, so he gave me my opportunity. And I brought him this project called Carnival that a guy named Dan Knopf wrote. And how I found it back then. This is like 1999. So I had no idea. I didn't want to go to the agencies and stuff like that we normally work with because, at that time I was just a guy helping out a bigger director find material, right?
Sure.
And so, I always get stuff sent to me on his behalf. So everything would come to me to try to get to him, which is okay. But I wanted to find something of my own. And I found this script online, believe it or not, back then. I just typed in unproduced screenplays. I did like a Google search or Yahoo search. I can't remember what it was at the time. And sure enough, this guy said, hey, download the first 2 acts of my teleplay or the pilot script, I should say. And I ended up downloading the whole thing. And I read it. I loved it. I met with him and then eventually took it to my boss, said, this is what I want to produce. And he said, okay, let's go. And, and brought his management team in and we talked about it. And we went to HBO and we sold it to HBO. So at the time, So, and then it went for 2 seasons. At the time, it was really an innovative project. Things that had never been done before. It was set in 1935 Depression America, right before World War II, the launch of World War II. It was a really big project for HBO at the time. Chris Albrecht, who was the president and CEO, had to fly to New York and tell the board, I guess, or whoever it is, that he's not going to pick up 2 pilots. He's only going to pick up 1 because that's how much more expensive Carnival was.
Of course.
And so he had to, which was a big deal at the time. So, and now I look back at that budget, I'm like, oh, that's nothing today. But back then it was a lot. And that kind of helped me get going. And I sold a couple other things with Dan, the creator of the show. But, being a non-writing television producer at the time, just was almost impossible, quite honestly. Very, very, very hard. And I didn't understand physical production a lot at that time. And I just started learning more and more about that, having produced a pilot. And then eventually over the years, I segued more into physical production, less creative. I still do some creative, I have projects set up, but I make my daily living, if you will, by going on to projects, figuring out how to execute them, budgeting and planning sometimes. And they're not just television stuff or movies even. I worked with Alejandro Iñárritu doing his VR project called Culinary Arena. That was basically a LACMA exhibit. I kind of get assigned, if you will, or presented projects that, quite honestly, a lot of people just can't figure out.
Yeah,
they know they want to do it. And so I always joke with people, I tend to get the job that either nobody else wants, right? Or it's the job that, hey, if it works out, that's great. If it doesn't, we're going to blame him. I always joke about that. So, and I've made a very good career of that. Do
you provide those services actually right now? I mean, if someone in Latin America has a great idea, they don't know how to make it happen, whatever, and do you provide that consultancy service?
Yeah, absolutely, all over the world. In fact, when I originally worked with Netflix, I worked with them for a year. Andy Fowler, who was an executive there, I had worked with at Disney when I was doing a movie called Tron Legacy. And so when he had brought me in over there to Netflix, it was more in the visual effects side, but there was also some elements of physical production. But I was at the time, they call it International Originals. And at that time, it was to try to help local filmmakers realize projects they really want to do in their local language, with local film, not just the director and actors and stuff, but everybody. So at that time, everything was globally centralized in Los Angeles. Now that's changed since then, because that's been almost 5 years now. So we had LATAM, they had APAC, we had EMA, which, for me, pretty much I covered everything but Canada, the United States, and the United Kingdom. So anything other than those 3 countries, other countries and other continents all over the world, I would help out. So I met with filmmakers, localized filmmakers all over the world, primarily helping more on the visual side at that point. But then also, if we had to talk physical production stuff, I was able to help out, or I'd redirect them back to the proper person who was at the studio to speak to.
Let's say someone in Latin America has an idea, has a Bible, different episodes of saga, whatever, and they think that it might fit within the Netflix local production, as you just mentioned. And someone wants to hire you. How much money are we talking about that these people must have in their hands?
It's hard for me to say how much I would charge them. Because what I normally charge a studio, a regular local language show or local would never be able to afford. They're two different levels. So, I'm a little bit older now than I was when I started. So I try to, in that case, I really try to see what is the person trying to do? Who is the person, and that doesn't mean established, because truthfully, I wouldn't even know because I'm not from that part of the world. Right. And then I would really more look and see what they're trying to do to see how I could help. And if that means evaluating it and not really getting paid much of anything, that's fine, because I know that, I can't do that all the time, but I do that. Because I just know not everyone can afford to do that. And I also know how it feels to be like, how do I start? Where do I start with? Because, I've been doing it for 22 years, but, I was there. Most people who were there know that. And I also think it's different than when I grew up, and I'm sure it's different for you when you grew up, is that, now with streaming and everything being worldwide, there's a lot more opportunity to get things done at a higher level than one is normally accustomed to, or just to even get something made that in your own country would never make. They would never make stuff. And that's what made Netflix very successful, was like, we're just going to go make all these shows that would have never been made years ago in their own country. Like never.
Yeah.
So, and look at like Squid Games in Korea is a classic example. That thing, I'm not sure how long that script has been around, but my understanding was that no one in Korea wanted to make it, and Netflix makes it. Look, it's one of the biggest shows in the world. And so that is the difference today. You have Amazon trying to do the same thing. You have Disney starting to do the same thing. I say, Amazon trying to do the same, because they're doing really good stuff over there, but they haven't launched all their stuff. They're really smart people over there, and Netflix is clearly smart people. But more importantly, they're giving opportunities to people that you normally wouldn't have. And I think that's an awesome thing. So it is definitely different than when I grew up.
Yeah.
And so now you're talking about the script and Netflix and everything. So what do you look in a script when deciding if you really want to be in that project or not? What do you catch your attention?
You mean as far as coming in to help produce it or to produce?
Yeah, as a producer side.
It depends. Of late, most of the stuff that I try to, or I get asked to do or to look at, tends to be very heavy on a technological side. So a lot of times we call it an LED volume. If you look at Mandalorian as an example, that's shooting in an LED. Sometimes it's more about motion capture work, performance capture work, something that relies heavily on technology. What tends will be what most of the stuff I get asked to do today or to look at. So a lot of things, it's like, what are they trying to do? Who is it? Because I'm at the point in my career where I do luckily have the choice of what I want to do and not want to do. And I find that if I know someone is just absolutely difficult, it's not worth it to me. Like life is too short, especially after the last couple of years, right? So I have the luxury to say no. I have the luxury to just be really honest and say, I'm sorry, you don't have enough time to do that. So I kind of try to find the right match, and I don't mind a challenge, if they're behind in time or if it's money. But truthfully, a lot of it is who are the people. That's a big part of it for me. And again, that doesn't mean being established as much as it is, do I know this person's just difficult? Do I know this person's just not a good person to work with? Like I don't need to do that. I don't think most people need to do that, but sometimes I understand why you need to do.
Yeah. Let's say someone starts like sending some draft for a drawer, and then comes with a story, and then put it in a Bible, and then pitch the Bible to what? The producer, investors? How does it work?
It depends on what it is and how you want to go about it. There used to be these what we call hard and fast rules. So you go to the studio because the studio is going to pay for it. Then you go to a network if it's a television show, because that's how it used to be distributed. Now, a lot of times the networks are owned by the studio, and sometimes there is really no network. It's a streaming service. And then you have localized streaming services that just acquire things. So I don't think there's any hard and fast rule. I think whatever you're trying to do, it depends on if you have a relationship with somebody somewhere that means something to somebody, even if that person is not going to do your project, but they are known in the community, in the filmmaker community, or known with investment bankers or whoever, you're trying to get to, and they will validate what you're trying to do is worth doing. That's sometimes enough to at least get you going.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's any like you have to do A and then you have to do B. I don't believe in that. I think you play to your strength. You try to find out, who you have the best relationship with. Let's say you don't know anybody. You don't know any money guys. You don't know any prominent filmmakers in your community. And you're just sitting there blindly, right? Well, a lot of times what guys do is, believe it or not, they try to drum. And that's the thing with social media that can be a good thing. I don't mean just send people blind emails. I'm like, building up hype, because a lot of times creative people can sell something by getting it all pumped up and just enough to draw someone's attention. Like, hey, I want to do that. That's the advantage of social media today. If one's willing to do that, right? Again, you just got to try to play to your strength. But just sending blind emails and stuff, that's tricky. It can happen. I mean, Stephanie sent me one. You see what happened? You're talking to guys.
That worked.
That worked. So it does work, But I think the biggest thing, Victor, is to take away is like, don't get caught up on just one way of doing it. I think you have to be professional in how you do it. That means if you're going to go talk to one person, give them time to respond before you move on to somebody else. Because what happens in everything, it happens to me too, you become a little impatient. Like you want to talk to everybody, right? Yeah. If you're talking to a director, give that director a bit of time before talking to another director. That doesn't mean you don't go talk to a producer or money guy. You can do all that. You kind of just want to be respectful about the people you're approaching, regardless of what level they're at. So you at least give them the time that they deserve, to respond to.
So if we want to help someone in Latin America that has a project and they got to a point where they already have a Bible, for example, it would be good to have different strategies. That's what you're saying. I mean, try to pitch it in the different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think you just do one thing. I advise you don't do just one thing. And the thing is that what the biggest thing that someone has to learn to accept, and it's an everyday struggle for everybody, is to be patient. Like how long someone might take to get back to you. General rule of thumb that I try to follow my whole career is if I send something to somebody, you give them 2 weeks. Then if you don't hear from them, you just ask them politely, hey, I'm just following up. Thought ask. Because what happens is some people the very next day are saying, hey, did you read it? It's like, well, They have a bunch of other stuff going on. They have even regular day life, families and everything else, let alone work.
Exactly.
So you just have to learn. And that just comes with time and maybe age, I guess. But I usually try to follow the 2-week rule out of the gate, even to this day. Even with people I really know, I always try to follow that. And then you don't want too much time to go on, because then if too much time goes on, they just forget.
Right.
Unless you hear from them, which can happen. So it's a bit of a balancing act, but yeah.
And Robert, you are, I'm sorry. So you are right now an executive and consultant at Netflix, right?
Yeah, so I consult for the studio. So I do get assigned projects to act as an executive on to a degree. And I say to a degree because I'm not a full-time employee for Netflix. I'm just on a contract basis for them.
Right.
And I've worked in that capacity before with them because what I'm doing with them is fairly new in the overall grand scheme of things, which Netflix has always been innovative at, is pushing the envelope and doing things differently than other people have done. I mean, yes, so there is a lot of people who say we've done virtual production, we're doing big LED, what they call LED volume builds, which is true, but not, to have a whole infrastructure, to have all the manpower that a studio is trying to deploy on that and being really driving the technological side of stuff. No other studio is really doing it at the level at which Netflix is doing it currently. So, and it's all new, fairly new when you really look at it.
And for example, in that area that you are, I know now that we're talking about Latin America and Netflix, and there's a lot of Brazilian, Colombian, also Argentinian movies and series in Netflix that we feel identified because we are from here and we know.
Sure.
Also the movie from Encanto and Disney, we feel identified because it's from Latin America, the music and all of that. Yeah. So we are talking about, because we were talking about the investors and how we pitch the Bible or how we pitch everybody. So how difficult is it to catch the eye of that kind of people? Do we have to, is it words that we have to express, or is it just an image that we have to show?
It depends on who you're talking to. I mean, if you ask me today versus 20 years ago, the reality is more people just like to look at something. Very few people really read everything, unfortunately. But that's not the case for everybody, clearly, right? I think you have to do both. You have to have something written really well. And I think if you can give them some visual element to catch their attention, you should be able to try to balance both. I think it's a good thing. The one thing is, with the part of the world that you're in is a very important part of the world for, honestly, the studios. It's a massive population, right?
50 million, I guess, in the US, right? Something like that.
Oh yeah. But not just that. It's, outside of English, I think it's either the second or third most spoken language in the world, right? I think it's right. English and Spanish, and then French, and maybe Arabic to some degree, or Chinese, if you want to just go by pure population. But landmass wise, Spanish is spoken everywhere, obviously Brazil is Portuguese, but again, worldwide. But it still has a sense, and one of the things in Latin American films and just the culture is a lot of it is of course of human nature, right? There's a lot of strong characters that people identify with. And even though I do not speak any Spanish other than cerveza or baño, literally that's the only two things I know. I can watch a Spanish film or a Spanish language film and enjoy it because I can relate to the characters. Because that is the strength of a lot of the films and projects coming out of the part of the world that you're in. Because you don't have the money to do all these big spectacle things. You don't need it, quite honestly.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the characters, about the human journey, right? Some of the best films that have come out of that region. And I think that will probably be the case for the television shows too. Is it nice to have some more money to increase the production value? Of course, right? Everyone wants to make it look great. And that comes with, again, that's the advantage of someone like Netflix. I'm really proud of them to have been a part of that initially in the international space, is that to give them the money to actually achieve their stated goal in a way that you can show the world, look, you don't have to come from LA. You don't have to come from the United States. You have the talent. You just need someone to believe in you and back you financially to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the advantage of someone like Netflix that really, really started. I really feel they've really started that.
They're very open-minded.
They're very open-minded about it. That's 100% correct. So, I know that other studios are trying to make a massive push in that part of the world. And I don't mean just servicing local language, or Spanish language projects and filming it there. I mean, really giving the filmmakers in that region boots on the ground, education, support, equipment, training, things that the United States used to do a lot of, that we kind of moved away from, unfortunately, for better or for worse, right? Mm-hmm. But nothing will ever replace, in my opinion, no matter how much money you have, no matter how much equipment you have, is the person doing the job. That's the most important thing, regardless if it's a man or a woman. Right. Yeah, regardless if it's a man or a woman or whatever, it doesn't matter. That person is what countries should invest in. Because I've been all over the world, and the first thing people go, oh, I can build the stage, and I have all the money, I can buy all the camera equipment, spend millions and millions of dollars doing that. And I just say, that's great, but who's going to do the job? Who's actually going to do the job? And then you realize they haven't even thought of that. And then what? You're going to spend millions and millions of your own country's money to then bring in a bunch of foreigners to do it and not train it? Literally.
Yeah.
You do find that with people quite often.
So is that what you do actually as a consultant for Netflix, Robert? Is that, you try to make an assessment and take a look at the whole picture and give your support to Netflix in that regard?
Not in my current role, no. That was the previous one. But even my current role, we do look at what's going on globally, what's going on. And, myself and my colleagues always say, it's great. We can build that thing. Yes, we can do that thing, but who's going to actually do the work? And then when we say who's going to do the work, is how do we give opportunity by educating and training up people, right? Mm-hmm. Like myself, I was lucky enough that the person I worked for a number of years gave me an opportunity. But I also learned a lot from him by making a lot of mistakes. And thankfully, he didn't fire me. I think he wanted to fire me 4 or 5 different times, but he did. And I'm very thankful for that. And that's how you learn. You actually learn more from your mistakes, quite honestly.
Yeah, sure. What about content, Robert? Most people say that content is king, right? And is Netflix out of content? Is there enough content for Netflix from a different part of the world? How is it going?
I would say, if you ask anybody, there's never enough content. And what I mean by that, there's never enough good content. Now, good content doesn't mean you spend a lot of money. I think that's not true. Because I've seen many projects. I'm sure you've gone to many movies. I've seen it, and they spend a lot of money, and you're like, oh my God, this is unwatchable, or this is not fun, or it's like you don't even remember it after you leave, right? You just don't even remember it. And then there's many times I've seen things that you can tell were made with very, very, very little money, but you don't care because it's like so well made. The acting is fantastic. The directing is good. The cinematography is beautiful. Everything is right. And so, is there enough content? I would say, is there enough good content? Because there are just some people like, yeah, we don't care. We need the content. We need to fill the coffers because we have to constantly change that. Doesn't matter if it's Netflix, Disney Plus, Amazon, Apple. It doesn't matter. But they all do want good content, but they also know that they need to fill the coffers with stuff.
Yeah, sure. Well, Robert, we are coming to the end of the podcast, and we are very pleased to have you here. What would be some final words of inspiration for all the people that is watching this podcast and have their dreams already on their hands and haven't been able to put them to work?
Sure. I would say, look, what is going on today isn't what went on 10, 15, 20 years ago, or even 5 years ago. Technology has allowed us throughout the world to communicate like we're doing right now. If you were to ask someone 5 years ago or 10 years ago, can we do what we're doing talking on a Zoom? People would look at you like, what are you talking about? And you could do that in every part of the world, believe it or not. I mean, I'm traveling to Africa here in a few weeks to go on a safari because they're trying to go there annually. And there are people that literally do not have a cell phone, but yet they have an iPad. I can't figure that out for the life of me, how you have an iPad and you have a cell phone, but okay, and they're watching content. I don't even know how to get the content, but it's pretty interesting. And I think when you look at the fact that technology has allowed us all to be able to communicate, it also allows people opportunity to work. And what I mean specifically, especially if you're an artist, especially if you're a writer, especially if you're going to get into directing stuff, yes, eventually at some point we have to physically come together to make a project. But there are many times too, because there's so many different roles in making movies and TV shows that you actually don't need to be on the set. You don't need to go into an office. You don't need to do all these things. And because of the availability of internet and bandwidth and the way things work, if you have the skill, the artistry, a lot more doors are going to open to you up that weren't available years ago. And I think whatever you do, stay true to who yourself is. Really work hard. Don't expect it to come tomorrow. Don't get caught up with people going, oh, I just got lucky and within 1 year I started doing all this stuff. It's sometimes hard not to do that, but if you stay focused and just are willing to put the time in, it'll eventually come to you. Yeah, and it doesn't matter what part of the world you're in.